Welcome to a special edition of the Cinelux podcast. My name is Hakeem Lashtani. Today we're talking about police brutality in America in the wake of the George Floyd murder. In part 1, we talked about the problems of police brutality and how they manifest. In part 2, we talked about the reaction and responses to the George Floyd murder. And in this part 3, we'll discuss possible solutions to the police brutality problem. Check the timestamps in the description below to skip to any part of the podcast.
Here we are at the solution segment, so have at it.
So one solution, I don't think is a perfect solution, that I sort of came up with was, how about the idea of, if you want to be a cop in the city, if you want to be a cop in a city, maybe you should have to live in that city, right? So like, if, let's say I live in like Chirac, right? Maybe I should have to live in Chirac. That way I have some personal like stake in the game. Because I know there's some like I know there is some people, people who travel like hours to get to their job or place of employment. And if I'm living in some like all white community with richer people who act a certain way, don't understand, and act a certain way and don't understand like the inner city. I go to that inner city every day. I'm not accustomed to that, and like when I see certain ways of how do you say, certain mannerisms, I might take it as a threat when it's just like a gesture or a playful gesture or something like that. And having your cop live in the city would probably reduce that. And also, it would have the stake where it's like, oh look, I have to go police my next door neighbor or like someone around the corner. I have to treat them with respect to some degree.
I have a counter to that.
It's a useless idea.
Can I have the counter? Can I have the counter to that to start out with? Can I counter myself?
Tyler, you go, Tyler.
I'll counter. Or you?
Let me counter myself first. The counter is.
That's no fun. You can't counter yourself. You're gonna go
let me
weak.
counter you first, bitch.
You're gonna go weak on yourself.
Oh, whoops! Didn't mean to call you that.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, so I was gonna say, what if you have a cop who lives in like an affluent area, policing in that affluent area, and you have a black male that comes jogging in that area? How do you think you would respond?
We don't take kindly to you around these parts.
Exactly. It's similar to the situation with Ahmaud Arbery, where you have people who weren't even cops. Well, previously they were responding to a situation, taking matters into their own hand. Kind of that like neighborhood watch mentality.
So this solution seems to be like a complete solution seems to be like multi-layered, right? So I feel like you bring up a really good point. And another point is that I was going to counter myself is that the numbers game, like how are you gonna get enough cops to like actually pull that off?
I got like 5 other reasons why. Like you guys hit 2. I mean, I'll give like 2 quick fire. Just because somebody lives or doesn't live in a neighborhood doesn't change their mentality or ability to understand people from a particular neighborhood, regardless of whether or not it's higher or lower in socioeconomic status. Like quote Ben Shapiro, I don't need homeless to know that kicking homeless people is wrong. I don't need to be trans to understand that doing anything bad to trans people is wrong. I'll just keep it like, I'm not going to go into anything specific, but you know what I mean? Like it's very obvious that human decency does not require location. And additionally, like the economic implications of requiring that all police officers be local. Even if theoretically it does work, there's still like not even any evidence to show that it would increase empathy towards the people around you. Of course, with Tyler's example of, well, okay, that doesn't eliminate the racial bias aspect that is likely to be there. It's just generally like not a good idea socioeconomically, realistically, even like anecdotally. So we can talk about more solutions though.
Yeah, that was just my off the cuff solution, but yeah.
No,
so I would say. Yeah, go ahead, Akeem. Go ahead.
I was gonna go on a long little thing. So if you wanna, or
Yeah,
No,
we're in
I was going to
solution.
defend.
Ideas.
I was going
we
to
need
defend my garbage solution, but yeah, go ahead.
to drop it.
No.
It's not
So-
completely garbage. I mean,
I
Of course not. It's not like abolish all police. It's just like
I get what you're getting at. You're thinking like if you live in a neighborhood, you'll care more about it and for the people that live there as well.
but human
which is-
psychology is not that simple.
one
That's
thing
something
that
my
I
dad would bring up to me in Chicago. Like my stepdad, he'd be like, "Yeah, the cops used to actually live in a neighborhood they worked in, so they would care more, and now that's not the case." So I get the sentiment.
one possible like middle ground is what if you had a civilian unpaid oversight committee, just like you have like the
Military.
like the school board that
Oh.
oversees public schools, but like you know how there's I forget exactly what it's called, but essentially it's like a group of parents that oversee the public schools, right? So like
PTA?
Those
imagine,
are
yeah,
already bad.
yeah, but like imagine you had something similar to that where it's not like full oversight, but essentially you have a group of citizens that oversee their local police, and that board is made up of only locals, and they determine how good of a job the police are doing in their neighborhood.
That sounds great for like a little town in Arizona, but really bad for Baltimore. Like who is this community? What's stopping special interest groups like let's just say a bunch of racists come up together and corroborates with police to over police black people, or people who are very into selling drugs and make a large profit out of it completely end the I'm just using this as a devil's advocate. I actually
Mhm.
think that it's better to not police drug stuff. But yeah, you get my point. Like there's so many things that can go wrong. Already
Just
go wrong with some like with PTAs already. There's so much that goes wrong, not just in movies but in real life. Parents are just not the best people making decisions for people that aren't their kids. At least in my opinion.
Oof.
I have opinions too. I just want to rip everyone else's first.
Nah, yeah,
so
you shoot one. You shoot one. Let's see how good it
yeah,
is.
I'm gonna rip this shit down.
I'm gonna give a meme solution and then a real solution. Like this is less.
Oh wait, don't tell us which one's which.
No. Tell us.
It'll be a game.
All right. Fun fact: I was a huge Andrew Yang supporter for a while.
Yang
Still am. Like, I mean, I would easily pick him over anyone. Actually, like he's number one for me.
His
And,
ideas would have worked with Corona.
Anyway, the point is that there's lots of things that could be done like outside of a UBI. Simply, like a lot of his plans revolved around getting the people who are best at doing a particular job do their job and giving them the opportunity to do their job the best that they can. Putting like I'm pretty sure all of us dislike bureaucracies in general. Putting a lot of administrative work, putting a lot of work that not properly trained to handle or do only overburdens police officers and only makes them more likely to, let's say, act out in fear and not understand what to do in a situation, and makes them resort to shooting instead of understanding and escalating. Like, that would prevent something like a Philando Castile. Can never really prevent acts of evil like Chauvin. That's just you could fire him. Like, okay, that's a whole other solution. We're going into accountability. That was going to be my real solution, but the meme solution is implementing some sort of anti-bureaucracy where there's an incentive for other
Anti-bureaucracy bureaucrats.
anti-bureaucracy bureaucrats that, like, of course, determine that, hey, maybe administrative work should be done outside of the police department. The police department don't file their own investigate. Like, imagine like a company investigating itself. Like, oh, we investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing. It's kind of like how police investigations go. Like, they should always be third party. They shouldn't have to respond to like mental health calls that could be to like licensed psychologists. They shouldn't have to respond to like, there's multiple examples specifically on the list that I'm actually going to post in the links chat. But, the second solution that I was thinking was specifically how you would incentivize accountability. I'll first go into, of course, I made the point earlier that you can't like remove guns from police because the general public in the U.S. has guns, 300 million in circulation. In Sweden, for example, the public does not have guns. The police don't need guns. At the very same time, the police in Sweden are like teachers, or unlike teachers in America, teachers in Sweden and police in Sweden are paid a lot more, and they have a much higher standard. Like you don't need like a degree, but training is longer. It's much more difficult, and this is incentivized by higher pay, higher benefits, and you have to take that away from the union, which is just self-serving, and have it more as like a reward system based on previous actions, not making large mistakes, and taking away those benefits when you do make those mistakes will even force possibly the most racist people at least act in accordance in human decency, even if they don't understand that someone who happens to be African American deserves equal rights to someone who happens to be whatever, insert race here. At least they'll understand that, hey, I'm going to be fired, my career is going to be over, there's no one here to protect me. And also rewarding, and I can see where it can go wrong because false reporting, but just generally rewarding whistleblowers in general, making it so it's going to be like from a cultural perspective first. Generally, right now, the belief is like even if there's a good cop trying to do something, they're still bad. Instead, we should change it through at least starting from the culture, and then as the culture moves down to actual implementation, police officers being rewarded for being whistleblowers, rewarded for stopping and calling out wrongdoing when they see it. And you do that through specifically monetary rewards. And that could be possibly funded from a federal standpoint, but that kind of just goes against like the libertarian aspect of giving too much power or waste of taxpayer dollars or something like that. It's complicated. I said a whole bunch of nothing, a whole bunch of everything at the same time. My bad.
I think the interesting thing I just want to note about speaking of other countries that pay their cops well and incentivize them to basically be good cops, I believe one of the very first protests, I think it's the largest actually in police history, was in 1914, and it was over unionizing actually, because the cops at the time, the idea was for all the work they did, even though other professions were getting the right to unionize and seeing their wages gradually get higher and higher, for cops, they were, on the contrary, getting paid less and they didn't have the right to unionize. So I don't know what the rest of the history is, but I think part of the reason that cop unions started at all was because for all the work they felt they did, they weren't rightfully compensated. So definitely compensation, because we have to admit, if you're someone, like for the good cops at least, if you're someone who's working some night shift in a dangerous part of town, I don't think it's really fair that you're making $40K a year, right? It's a demanding job, it's a risky job, right? Mm-hmm. And the pay should reflect that. So for those who say they wanted the union because they didn't feel compensated enough for the job, I can definitely understand it. I would agree with you that part of making sure that cops have an incentive really to perform well on the job is making sure that they're compensated for the job they do.
Training should also reflect that as well, if you're going to increase the pay.
Yeah, for sure.
Increase training, increase in standards, decrease in overhiring. Like, the thing is, like, even a shortage of future doctors, because like this is a whole like other argument, but just in general, there's a visible shortage of new doctors because of a lack of incentives due to healthcare. I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole different 1 hour conversation.
You should have been on our healthcare podcast.
Also wanted to quickly mention that, of course, not easy to Sweden
cut out.
represent. Sorry, it's not good to use Sweden as an example because they're relatively ethnically homogenous. Although that might not be true, but for the future,
They are ethnically homogenous.
different conversation.
There's a lot of Somalis in Sweden, so he's representing.
The point I'm trying to make is these incentives in place will likely be misused, per se, at the very start. There will be people making more than they deserve. In the end, it's a time-consuming process. But those who are more qualified, for example, people who are ex-military and don't have PTSD, for example. No, listen. Like, ops with a military background tend not to shoot people. It's really, like, there's actually, like, I'll post a study I read. Just in general, like, police officers who are ex-military tend to be very good at de-escalating because handling citizens at home is a lot less stressful than handling literal ops in a country that isn't your own.
What if they act like they're handling civilians in a country that's not their own?
That's the thing. Like, of course, that would also go inside with the policy where mistakes would be heavily punished and incentivized against, and correct behaviors would be heavily incentivized for. But in general, like, that was just an example. I'm not saying like people from the military and the police departments. It's just that people who will be more likely to want to serve justly and to protect the citizens of their city or of the United States, like, you would incentivize people with that strong sense of justice, with the additional mix of capitalism where they would be able to self-sustain and have a good life and feel rewarded for their life work. And not just with police officers, but with like firefighters, with multiple other. It's also has to do with unions. Unions are too powerful. You have to break them up somehow, but like, I don't even know where to start on that, let alone implement that into some kind of large plan.
I'm going to go on a bit of a different tune from what you guys were saying, if you don't mind. Because what I was going back to sort of the original question of what you think the solution is, I think that the most practical solution that can be implemented is essentially a bunch of smaller solutions at different levels. So I think that there's only so much you could do to the police so fast. And yeah, the police aspect of the police brutality problem is one of, if not the most significant aspect. But I think that you need to tackle all aspects. So one thing you need to tackle, which I think is huge, is the legality of certain drugs. You really need to legalize weed. And the reason that I mentioned that one is that I think after gay marriage, which was a few years ago, that is the next big legal and cultural shift that's going to happen in this country, in the sense that I can see weed being legalized, hopefully in the next administration, but we'll see. But that's going to be really big, because that's sort of that will completely eliminate all the these sort of stop and frisks and the small encounters that cops have with black people that put the black people in danger, where they like smell some weed on them or something like that. So if you legalizing weed is one step. So that's like the sort of legal level. The judicial level, I think, is a termination of the immunity that cops have. We're already seeing that now a little bit, but the cops that shot the man in Atlanta at the Wendy's, the cop was arrested and charged with murder. But there really needs to be a precedent, I think, that if you do this, if you shoot a man who's running away, you're going to be charged with murder. If you are present and you don't stop something like that, obviously in this case, in the Atlanta case, it happened too fast for any of the other cops to stop him. But in the Floyd case, if you're present and you just watch it happen slowly but surely, there needs to be legal repercussions. I think there needs to be legal repercussions if any part of a police report is shown to be falsified. I think there needs to be legal repercussions if you fail to rat out someone, a fellow officer, and then video later comes out showing that the officer did something, but you witnessed it and you didn't say anything. So I think on that level there needs to be change. I think specifically on the enforcement police level, the biggest change that needs to occur is a demilitarization. I'm not for slashing cops' salaries. I'm not for going out and just firing a bunch of cops. I'm for demilitarizing and training. So I think that
de-escalation instead of escalation.
Exactly. So the training needs to be, I think, twofold. On one hand, it needs to be situational in the sense that you're put in a scenario where there's a situation that's escalated. Your job as the police officer, in my opinion, should be to either keep it at the same level of escalation or de-escalate it. And this is what I mean. You look at the case that happened in Atlanta, right? You have someone who's drunk and they've gotten your taser, right? They've been aggressive, right? So if you pull out your nightstick, right, ideally you want to de-escalate, but if you can't, the guy's drunk, he's not listening. If you pull out your nightstick and you hit him and you knock him down, that's okay because he was already being aggressive towards you, right? He was being violent. So you can respond with some sort of moderated violence. Obviously, you're not gonna like shatter his legs and stuff. That's not okay. But shooting him is definitely not okay. That's escalating it. So there needs to be training, situational training, where cops learn to de-escalate. And the other thing is that there needs to be combatives training that focuses on forms of combat that do minimal damage, which tend to be like jujitsu or Greco-Roman wrestling, as opposed to punching some guy, potentially knocking him out, giving him a concussion. If you can restrain people without hurting them, that's ideal. And I think that if generally going broad again, if we start out and try to get like a few things, like a little bit on the legal level, you legalize weed, maybe you increase the punishment for cops who do certain things, or you make it so that, for example, you could say that police testimony is inadmissible without accompanying body cam footage, something like that. You attack it on the legal level, you attack it on the judicial level, and you attack it on the enforcement level. I think you'll get the biggest change quickly. And that's essentially what was used during the civil rights movement, right? The judicial level, Brown versus Board of Education, similar cases. The practical economic level, I guess, which in this case would be the enforcement level in the form of the boycotts. And then the legal level, getting certain laws put in place that would provide protections for African Americans.
I think you raised a lot of amazing points there. And then I wanted to reiterate and further agree on a vast majority of these interactions with not just African Americans, but Americans in general, have to do with really outdated or useless drug laws that don't really help anyone. Like both the start and the end goal, like the start product and the end goal of most drug stops don't do much. The idea of cleaning up streets doesn't really change much because it doesn't really focus on the issue of addiction itself. And the punishment system is useless because drugs are rampant in most prisons. And a vast majority of people who are arrested and convicted are not sellers, but users who are addicted and in possession and truly need help. It's not just with weed. Like, in general, over the past decade, weed offenses have been going down drastically. They haven't within a decade ago, but the vast majority of them are due to like narcotics or prescription drugs that are being used and abused by individual users and not sellers. That's why I think that possessing drugs, regardless of how dangerous or deadly they are, on an individual level, let's just say like they'll probably be set to specific amounts. For example, 5 grams of insert drug here. If the police catch you with it, like confiscation would be the worst that they do. They shouldn't arrest you and refer you to a jail cell. Instead, they should refer you to rehab centers, which would probably benefit a lot. Moving certain funding from police departments and jails towards rehabilitation would be an amazing idea. And then I'm pretty sure you guys heard of like the Portuguese model, where they actually went and did this. They decriminalized every drug there is, and overdoses went down, rehabilitation center visits skyrocketed, addiction went down, literally everything across the board ended up working in a great positive feedback loop. These departments would have to spend less money on dealing with drugs. like a cartel even naturally like left the country and started like divesting their funds to other countries in Europe. It was a really, really good situation where I think that America could learn a lot from other countries in this particular situation where criminalizing drugs from possession, not sellers. Sellers should also still be executed. But at the same time, referring users to rehabilitation instead of jail will definitely not just help end police brutality a little by little, but also end up saving America because the evidence is there that in general overdoses will go down, rehabilitation visits will go up, stuff like that. Like there's multiple different solutions that may not have to do specifically with the police, but with laws that are relatively unjust and don't really do what they set out to do, which is to protect the American people.
One of the counters I've seen to the idea of being able to just decriminalize drugs, at least in America, is the fact that, for one, America makes a lot of money off the drug trade. And for two, we are a large population of the market for people who buy, to the point where I can't remember which drugs it was exactly, but I think it had to do with coke. But there was a point where we criminalized one drug, but because the American demand for drugs was so great, they just decided to make something new so they could keep on selling, because the money that they make over here from selling to the Americans is just absolutely ridiculous, right? So it's like, I don't think, I think we also have to recognize that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in America who want to buy those drugs. And I'm pretty sure at this point it's a thing that, the government makes money off of it. So that's why for me personally, I say a decriminalization of all drugs, I don't think is something we can do right now. So I personally would not push for that. I would say, starting with something like weed, maybe, because even weed is like, there's a lot of money that's made off the fact that weed is currently illegal, despite it not even, being that bad.
Struggling to follow, like, if people are making money off of it being illegal, what's wrong with legalizing it and destroying their means of income?
Because you can make more money off the fact that it's illegal.
Yeah, but let's say crack cocaine's legal, right? And you make $5, and I make it legal, and I sell it to everyone at $3, and I have a superior product.
No, that's you, the individual, making money. For the government, if it's legal, they make less.
So wait, I'm struggling to figure out like why
if it's legal, they make tax money.
Yeah.
Here's the issue. I think that. Oh, by the way, I had to change my phone because my laptop ran out of charge. But here's the issue. I still think that the evidence is there that any cost benefit of the war on drugs is greatly outset by the cost that comes from dealing with a incarceration. It's expensive to keep people in jail. It's expensive to administer Narcan to people that are overdosing. It's actually less expensive to deal with rehabilitation instead of having to, like, I'm just saying that I don't think that America's actually making a good profit off of the war on drugs. Of course, the cartels are, but the point of decriminalizing possession is only to offset for this conversation, police brutality in the interactions that police end up having with people because of drugs, and B, it ends up helping people of color especially, but
and drug
Americans in general from dealing with the issue of drugs, where instead of having to be prosecuted and sent to jail, they could like, for example, instead of being given like the punishment of, hey, instead of saying, oh, you have to do community service or something, say, hey, you have to go to this rehab session, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
So then I guess I would say I probably I would have to go do some more looking into how exactly the drug market works. But I would still say that given
America probably makes a lot
hold
of money
on. Given previously we were talking about proportionate responses and making goals that are, that wouldn't get people just be like, this can't happen, I'm not getting on board. Jumping straight to decriminalization of all drugs, I think, would be unwise right now, which is why I would say, if we start with just weed, I think at this point, weed culture is pretty much accepted in America, right? I think that's something that could plausibly be seen happening, like Hakeem said, maybe in the next administration, if not, within the next 2 or 3. I think weed could possibly be legalized. That's possible. But if you just jump to all drugs, then I think that's a losing battle from the get-go.
I agree. I think you struck a really good point there. In the end, I think that it's different from the idea that like, oh, all cops should be or police should be abolished. The issue is that idea in of itself, even if the public was with it, is a bad idea, in my opinion. In my opinion, decriminalization of possession of drugs is a good idea, but you're right in which it would be very difficult for the culture to accept it all at once, and that it would be good to fight the battle with small steps at a time with the legalization of weed. I think you're right on that.
The other thing vis-a-vis the legalization of weed, just briefly touching on, you made a good, interesting point about weed culture, but I think that the weed culture is a minority of the people who are smoking weed. Conservative estimates indicate that 20% of the United States population smokes weed on a regular or semi-regular basis, which is defined as once a month or more often. 20% means 1 in 5 people in this country is smoking weed. And there's definitely not 1 in 5 people in this country who's like pothead, weed culture kind of person. I think when you think about it, it's like, to me, weed is often compared to tobacco, but the real better analog in terms of intensity of the drug is coffee, in the sense that it's like there are some people who are like coffee culture, coffee all the time, coffee all the time. But most people just drink coffee and don't think about it, right? It's been completely diluted and destigmatized in society. You would never think, oh, wait, that's weird that this guy's drinking coffee or something, right? So I think that weed can operate a level like that. Probably a little bit more awareness than coffee, but in the long run, I'm talking about. But hopefully a little bit less than tobacco or alcohol, because it's just less of an impactful drug compared to tobacco and alcohol.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Ooh, who left?
His phone probably died.
Yeah, his phone probably died. That is... Oh, he's back.
Welcome back.
My bad.
Don't let it happen again.
Struggles of using a phone instead of the laptop.
We've been talking a lot about like improving the Black experience, I guess, in America. I feel like there's a lot of opposition to it. Like people just, they don't want to do it for whatever reason. What do you guys think that is?
Can you clarify your question real quick? Like, what do you mean by the Black experience?
The Black experience.
Just like all right, so legalizing marijuana, pretty much just trying to get rid of the altercations that come into play when people are confronted for illegal drugs. We were talking about earlier I think we're talking about defunding the police and kind of putting more of that money into the community, so that you could, put the money elsewhere for after school programs, things like that. Just overall to put, Black people in a better light.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are afraid of change, especially because in this particular case, we're discussing how deep the problems run into the system, which means that the widespread fundamental changes also need to run really deep. And I think that people are afraid of that change, especially when it's deep. I don't think they're afraid with the outcome so much as they're afraid of the possible unintended consequences and what that means for them. Like, I don't think anyone, well, not anyone, but I feel like a lot of people they're all on board for helping Black people in their fight against police brutality. But when you say defund the police, they think to themselves, that all the interactions that they've had with the police are going to be positive, and they think that there's a risk that if you defund the police, okay, maybe then if someone's going to burglarize my home and I call them, there's no one's going to arrive. You know what I mean? Like they're afraid of going through that period of change that would lead to an improved society. And I don't really think they have they're afraid of the end goal as much as they are of the change.
And to add on to that, it's kind of like for a few people, when you speak of Black issues in America, one of the first things they'll go to is, well, what personal responsibility have they taken themselves before trying to change the system? And oftentimes people, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the term 1350.
No.
1350, where they'll say, it's like we're only 13%, despite being 30% of the population, yada yada, 50% of the crime or whatever, right? So they'll bring stuff like that up and be like, well, yeah, how about this, huh? Checkmate. And I think what we failed to do so far, and on both sides of the aisle, is, on one side, there's this strict focus on the system being the absolute cause for every single problem. And then on the other, there's Black mentality being the problem and, the root cause for every single issue. And I think, the two aren't mutually exclusive. It's very possible to acknowledge that the system is messed up, while at the same time saying that within the Black community, we need to, foster support for ourselves and kind of change the narrative we have, because a lot of them will say, oh, look at how they're telling their children that they'll never be successful in America, right? So those are things that are understandably, like, it's understandable how, as a Black person, especially in some neighborhoods, you would feel that way. But I think it's very possible to say that the system is messed up and we need to change it. But at the same time, ourselves, we need to believe that there is a better future, waiting for us, and not allow ourselves to be defeated simply because, for the time being, things aren't going the way we want them to go, right? If they aren't going the way we want them to go, that's precisely why we should be, doing whatever we can, even if that's just keeping a positive mindset in the hopes that tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
Not very well put.
And I think, Hakeem, this is where, I don't know if you'd want to go into that right now, but we had a discussion earlier about
the reparations.
Capitalism, basically, and the idea that it's
reparations.
Not reparations.
No, we talked about reparations.
Okay, I can get into this a bit. I think the brief context of this discussion was the idea that some people have put out there that racism stems from capitalism, or racism is inevitable in the presence of capitalism. And I completely disagree with this statement on almost every level.
Disagree completely.
I think that people and I'm going to generalize here very briefly. People on the left often say that communism and socialism has not been tried properly, and that's why it hasn't worked. I think that in the case of the problems that we face, it comes from the fact that we haven't used capitalism well enough, and not inherent problems with capitalism. And this is what I mean. One of the basic principle of capitalism, from a sort of theoretical level, going back to what John Locke described, is that everyone starts out at the same level, and you compete to see he who tries harder or has more ingenuity is going to do better and therefore get more. That's the basic principle. There's a few problems. One of them is that not everyone starts out at the same level. Let's ignore the genetic differences for now and just talk about people's socioeconomic status. Because how much money your parents have and the environment that your parents can afford to keep you in greatly affects your success. It's not a completely fair playing field. That is to say that if your parents can afford to send you to better schools, and can afford a tutor for you, or can afford to sort of keep you in programs after school that'll get you out of trouble, kids after hours, that kind of stuff, that means you have a better chance of succeeding. So essentially, the economic game can be played throughout generations. The buck just doesn't stop with you. It's going to go to your kids. And a lot of the reason that people try to climb the socioeconomic ladder is to make their life better for their kids. Now, because you can play this capitalist game through generations, it's reasonable to look back at previous generations and say that African Americans now, part of the reason that they're in the rut they're in is that dating back to the Civil War, they were at a disadvantage because of slavery. Because since the abolishment of slavery, African Americans had at the time no resources, and they slowly accrued them, but they never got to the point that the playing field was ever level. And so in this sense, it's not that capitalism as the system has resulted in this racism, but rather the poor implementation of capitalism. I think that since we're talking about solutions, I think that the main practical solution to this is a very, very high quality, well-funded public education system is the most reasonable way to level the playing field. Because I don't think you're going to take people's money away from them and say, hey, you can't put your kid through a good college because that's not fair to this other person who doesn't have the money for it. I think it's reasonable if you have funds to try to get your kid to do whatever. I mean, I think that's fair. However, the public sort of bottom line baseline alternative needs to be very good. And I don't think we can have true capitalism if you feel as though you can't take risks in your life. You can't try to start a business, or you can't try to buy a house, because if your investment fails, your kid's not going to have anything. They won't be able to go to school, or they won't be able to afford basic health care. This is part of the reason why African Americans accrue less wealth than white people, because they're less likely to take risks, because they have less of a safety net. And a baseline safety net in terms of, in my opinion, universal health care and universal education is just the bare necessity to allow for proper capitalism to occur, because then people will have enough safety to be willing to take risks. And it is that risk taking that will allow them to accrue wealth throughout generations.
I agree 100%. I mean, living in Chicago, I saw exactly what you're talking about. People don't have health care, and all the schools, like mostly in the area where I grew up in, were pretty shitty. So you're not learning much in school. They're not after school programs. You don't have things to look forward to. You become bored. You look to gangs to fill that boredom or to have some kind of belonging, and the cycle continues.
Not just that, but being in a gang presents an economic opportunity of which you would never normally have. Like,
right. Well, it's easier than like filling out. For some people, it's just a group of friends. Easier to fill out than filling out a job application and trying to get an actual job.
Also, the money is
Especially,
just completely different.
It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah, more instant gratification.
Yeah.
So one of the things, going back, since we're talking about solutions, I think that if I were sort of the person making all the decisions, I would make it so that all the money coming out of the police that were saying people defund the police, I'd put that in education first, because I think that probably the biggest issue, maybe I don't want to say the biggest because there's a hell of a lot of issues, but there's just a complete lack of education at the K through 12 level in this country, public education. And it's like, I think at the college level, like, we're great. I mean, trade schools, there could be more trade schools, there could be a lot of other stuff. But generally speaking, there's good public universities available. And at the high level, there's good private universities available. But there really needs to be more, like, better basic education that's not only teaches more effectively, but teaches in a more holistic way.
Completely agree. And I also just wanted to add that firstly, like, the prescription of college for everyone is not what like will make the society better. Like, for example, I think the percentage is like 6% of high school graduates that pursue higher education go into trade school. That number is like closer to 50% in multiple other countries, and like 60% in Germany. Even though there's a huge demand for jobs in the trades and other vocational training, Uh, Also, one thing I wanted to mention is that I think I remember seeing the modern educational system was heavily based off of the Industrial Revolution, and they wanted us to like be able to behave well in factories and learn well in factories, and that system hasn't changed. And then there's also the whole issue of whether or not we should eliminate the privacy of student grades, because in countries like Korea and Japan, which have very, very well respected educational systems, let's just say you failed a test. Well, literally anyone who knows your name could look at the scores that were posted publicly for you to see. So it kind of incentivizes.
That's tough.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I learned that from playing Persona.
But yeah, that's probably not best for the American system. But at the same time, there are steps that we can take. For example, financial literacy is a part of most countries' education systems, but it's not a requirement in the U.S. Like as somebody in STEM, like I love like chemistry and biology. Well, biology is probably more important, but like it's probably better to teach more practical things even earlier. And I would say like it should probably adopt to the point where it's more on the curriculum and less about the technology. Like in Baltimore, it's one of the highest funded school systems in America. Like there's so much money going into the Baltimore public school system. Every kid is getting a new iPad, a new Mac. Every classroom has a Promethean board, but that doesn't really change the fact that the classrooms have like 40 kids in it, and that the teachers are barely being able to control what a student learns, because I think the statistic is that like 2/3 of a student's educational outcome is based from inside. Nope.
Damn.
This phone said nope.
He was about to get into it.
See, that's what happens when you don't have enough education. People can't get jobs to afford phones to be able to Discord.
I mean, it's a good thing he brought up the Baltimore thing, because just like I was actually just going to mention the contention people raise, where it's like, you know, just because you throw money at a problem doesn't mean it'll get solved, because in a lot of cases that money is just going to get either pocketed somewhere or used for the wrong things. Like a lot of money in Baltimore right now is supposed to be used for housing, but on the contrary, you're seeing a bunch of land basically get sold to private companies who are using it for whatever they want. In a lot of cases, it's housing for the more affluent among us, where it's like, well, you do realize there's a housing problem in Baltimore. Like you drive around and the amount of dilapidated houses you see, like right in the middle of the city, it's absolutely astonishing. And yet this land is being used for, you know, not creating the housing that's clearly necessary. So I would agree definitely that we need better schools, right? Education is probably the number one thing we could get going. But at the same time, dealing with that issue of the money being used for the wrong things, or, you know, still going into the school, but it doesn't make a difference, that's one thing that I don't know how to solve, really.
I don't know. For that case, I think Sowell has a pretty good explanation for like basically giving the parents the money, and or like a voucher type school voucher, and being like, pick your school, and that way generally the parent will pick a better school, and school will have a reason to actually compete and actually like form something where teachers can get more easily fired for being garbage teachers and stuff like that, where it's like now a garbage teacher just continues being a garbage teacher because they're protected by the union.
Well, the contention there would then be, you know, if everyone realizes that the school they have is trash and they decide to go to the next school over, then you end up with the same system where that school may have been working fine because it had a limited number of students and funding specifically for that amount, but now everybody's going there.
The school would be limiting the amounts of people coming in, of course.
Selective
They're not going to
enrollment.
accept Yeah.
The ideal solution to that is that the thing is, like, we would need to invest in our public schools, but not in the way that we've been doing before. As I mentioned, like, the newest technology, like, my school, like, as I graduated high school, still had like the overhead projectors with the clear paper and the markers. Like, that didn't change the fact that my education was pretty high tier compared to many other people in the United States. What would
Weird
change?
flex, but okay.
Yeah, weird flex. I don't know why I'm saying it like that, but
No, I'm joking.
I no. But with vouchers, it's a good thing for the system that we have now, where kids who normally wouldn't be able to get the education would be able to get that educational opportunity that they normally would not have gotten. But going off more about what Yvonne said, there are certain solutions that we can make to curriculums to incentivize good teachings, to put teachers to put money into parents' hands so they're better well equipped to take care of their children, to help aid education in the home. There's like multiple other things that we can do other than just to increase vouchers infinitely so people can just like pick their schools like restaurants. Like, I don't think that's the best solution.
I just thought about this. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, you definitely have to expand the curriculum. Not everybody wants to go to high school to then go on to college. They might want to go to a trade school, so you might want to have something that's more practical. Definitely sports programs are a huge thing. And like where you have a lot of high school boys who want to play sports, it's good to put money into those systems specifically. Keep them off the street.
In response to both basically to everything we've been saying so far, I just thought about this really. It's, where would we start fixing the problem in terms of the generation, right? Because if you give the parents the money, well, you have to keep in mind that a lot of them went through conditions worse than the ones we have right now. A lot of them may simply be just barely high school graduates, and a lot of them may be lacking the financial literacy that we're trying to give the current generation, right? So if you just give them the money, they won't necessarily. I'm not trying to say it's their fault, but through no fault of their own, really, they're not going to be the best at handling that money, right? So you run into an issue. It's like it's up to them to decide what to do, but they've never known really how to handle money.
For schools, at least it would be a voucher and not like cash money, right? So it'd be like, here, choose your school, and we'll send the money to the school, type thing.
No, more like on the plan of UBI, actually, like actually giving the families money. And like Iran raises a fair point where, of course, not everyone is financially literate enough to do the best that they can with their money. But at the very same time, very, very, very few people would be doing detrimental things with the extra money. A vast majority of money that would go towards parents would probably go towards things like bills, things like more like credit card payments, towards food, towards clothes, towards things that they need. I doubt that parents are going to start like investing in the right stocks if they're living in Baltimore, but at the very same time, any money would help. That's the issue. I think that a lot of underestimating what families would do with extra money kind of causes that stigma, where if they like had that little like floor to push them up, I think that would greatly benefit the children and the educational system first and foremost, but then also the parents to be able to help their child pursue whatever educational path that they would want, in addition to the other changes you would have in the educational system itself.
So how would you feel about, instead of giving them just straight liquid money, a voucher where it's not like, so essentially the voucher would say...
Are we talking about schools or UBI right now?
UBI, but let me explain what I mean by voucher in this case. It would be like it would be UBI, but it wouldn't be just liquid money. Like it wouldn't be cash handed out to you for you to use on anything you want. It would be like restricted to specific, kind of like food stamps, right? Yeah. So it's like we're giving you this amount of money, but the only things you can use it for are exactly things like bills or anything deemed necessary, really. So in that sense, you're giving them the support they may need to pay for life's necessities, but at the same time, as you're implementing these financial literacy sessions or whatever, you're not just giving them money that they could, waste or anything. Like, you're still helping them out without just letting it be a free for all. Like, do what you want with the money.
Here's my rebuttal towards that. I think that, like, of course, there are examples of detrimental purchases like drugs or something, but assuming that people are not buying drugs, let's just say they buy like a new haircut, or they get their nails done, or they buy a whole bunch of fast food. In the end, it's still a good thing because it just ends up boosting the economy around people. When people spend in their own neighborhoods, when people spend on small businesses in general, it boosts a neighborhood, it boosts the economy, it boosts traffic, it increases investment into a particular area. That's kind of like the whole idea of UBI being a big positive feedback loop. Because even if people are buying useless things like a guitar or something, like, you don't need a guitar to succeed or live, but a guitar might bring happiness, might increase some kind of psychological. Yeah, you go.
How true would that be with Amazon, though? Everybody's buying on Amazon.
I mean, for the case of
Especially
Andrew
with
Yang,
COVID.
his whole thing was taxing Amazon or the big companies to pay for the fact they're not actually recirculating money in the local community. But yeah,
that's kind of the idea behind the VAT tax. Basically, like a sales tax for every purchase or interaction between businesses and their suppliers and consumers and stuff.
Part of it, I think, on the tax issue is just that there's just way too much ambiguity and too many loopholes.
yeah.
And I'm not. I mean, I think that in an ideal world, we would actually just have a flat tax rate that would just be like one number. It's like 6%, and that's just the end of it. But barring that, I think that they're like, the way these companies get away with paying less taxes than they really ought to is because they can funnel it to other countries. You know, Google's owned by Alphabet, which is in Ireland, and then they only pay taxes in Ireland. There's like a million ways that they get away from paying their fair share. And I think that rather than trying to figure out how they can, like, rather than inventing new taxes for them to have to pay, the easier thing to do is just to enforce the existing laws in a more reasonable way.
Basically, have a reform of legalese.
Quick rebuttal though. A VAT tax isn't new. It's like used by every other country in the world because it's so unloopholeable. Like, it's quite impossible to avoid. Some countries have it at a rate like extremely high to the point where it's stifling businesses. Cough, France at 26%. Cough. Like, imagine like a 26% sales tax on like if Amazon needs to pay for a shipment. Let's just say that shipment's like $1,000. It's easier for Amazon to pay like an extra $100 and an extra $260. Either way, like a VAT tax of 5 to 10%, which has worked wonders in multiple other countries, is a lot better than the idea of like a wealth tax, for example, that's been tried in literally every European country and quickly abolished because of how much of a nightmare it was. Like, that's the thing. Like, there's so many different tax ideas that are being like offered by like up and coming politicians that have already been tried in multiple other countries, like a wealth tax, and they failed miserably. So there's no point in trying it here because they're even easier to game and easier to loophole and harder to implement versus VAT.
My bad, continue.
Yeah, versus the VAT tax, which is similar to like a flat tax, in which is just a tax that applies to a particular aspect of a capitalistic economy.
Yeah, it'd be like that.
Oh. I was wondering why he stopped mid-sentence.
I thought he was breathing.
Yeah. Do we wait?
Bro, this man probably got like a S3, bro.
Nah, he has an iPhone. Yo, what if it's the government trying to keep them quiet or something. I don't know.
Censor 'em.
I think this is the longest break yet.
He might not come back.
He's
Oh.
I'm
back.
hungry.
Oh, welcome back.
Have I been talking to nothing?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
you got
And
like
you
30
too.
to 45 seconds.
So what?
R.I.P.
Yeah, the last word you said was capitalism, and then you just left.
R.I.P. Yeah, I guess I'll just summarize like VAT tax good, wealth tax bad.
Okay.
Yo, my phone is a nightmare. I'm sorry, you guys.
It
You have
happens.
do you have an S3 by chance?
No, an iPhone 7.
Yeah, I told you you didn't have an S3.
The galaxies are great.
Hold on. We're not talking about galaxies right now.
Oh, what do you mean S3? There's a phone that's an S3 that's not a galaxy?
No. I mean, let's not get sidetracked too hard. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah.
All right, VAT tax good, wealth tax bad.
Yes, sir.
So, what do you guys on the topic of maybe various solutions being implemented? How do you guys feel about retroactively looking back at cases of people who have been put in prison for nonviolent marijuana crimes, and presuming that marijuana has been legalized, releasing them from prison?
Oh, definitely. The only
Of
problem
course.
is the time. Like, you can't really take that back. If that makes sense. Like,
Mm,
prison
yeah.
make people more violent. And
I mean, when
more-
you get exonerated, you can't really put a price on someone's freedom. But at the very least, I believe when you're exonerated, it gives you some form of compensation.
I think that it's necessary and that like if we do it, it would be a big moment of celebration in the American public. Like if you think about it, it would be like something that no other country has really done before, except like post regime change after a war or something, where like fake war criminals that haven't really done anything get released. Like we
Yeah.
admit that we made a wrongdoing with marijuana. We admit it was wrong to convict so many people and have them in jail for a nonviolent drug offense of a drug that isn't even toxic, for example. And then we do that, and that actually will end up acting as a positive feedback loop and bringing more solutions and actions to the table. Where like, hey, we did this big thing; it's amazing. I watched like this like article, like I watched this video and read an article about like why it would end up like saving America, but it was super biased. I think I should probably stop, honestly.
I mean, the bias is fine as long as you explain where like what it was, I guess.
Yeah, just like long story short, exonerating a lot of people would help jumpstart the economy, help increase public. What's the word? Morality is not the word. Morale, increase public morale, stuff like that.
So with all these solutions, I think we could probably try to brainstorm for the next 2 years. Really, part of a solution is also getting people on board. So I think for our final section, how would you guys go about trying to get people on board with basically trying to start any sort of change? I guess
Well-
the topic of this discussion was mainly police brutality. So our focus is going to be how you get people on board really with trying to reform police or whatever it may be. But just in general, how would you get people on board with any of the solutions that have been proposed so far or that you would propose outside of this conversation?
I would say the current problem we really face
Going in and out.
is there is a lot of like people above the age of 65 like deciding
Is that boomers?
policies. Yeah, I think it's boomers. Yeah, it's boomers. But and I think the problem with them is that they've built their life to a good point now, to where they don't have to see change for a lot of things, because it's like their life's already good. Change for what? So I think the first step is definitely like getting younger politicians in, and politicians all the way up. I feel like a lot of people try to focus on president and Congress people, but it's like your local politician is equally as like complicit.
Let me run back real quick before we talk about convincing people. There is this idea going around basically with voter apathy, where people say that there is no reason to vote. And I think voting is probably one of the solutions that we seem to completely have overmissed. What are our thoughts on the idea that there is no point in voting? And I think I understand, at least at the federal level, but when it comes to the local level, are we on board with the idea that voting is pointless?
No.
No,
Voting
isn't
is
pointless.
the opposite of pointless.
No, I get the sentiment, because the main issue is that like we'll vote in politicians that have a great message and a great plan, and they end up getting like broken by the system, the swamp per se, because special interest groups will still lobby and give bonuses and benefits to politicians regardless of what their initial plans were. So every politician ends up seeming more of the same because of the swamp per se, and that's why like a lot
The
of people
swamp
have
that
thought,
Trump promised he'd get rid of.
yeah, and then ended up just making larger. He's the giant bullfrog that found his way home in the swamp. But you get my point.
So we agree voting is necessary.
I think
As pointless as it may seem, it's still one of the strongest tools we have.
It's a cultural thing more than anything, right? If you have a culture where everybody votes, then even if you have a situation where there's people start to get swampy, if that, like, let's say you come in, you're full of energy, you have all these plans, but after 2 terms now you're starting to just be sort of old-fashioned. If the culture is such that after 2 terms you'll get voted out, no one cares, no one really says, oh look, you have all this experience, people only care about your voting record. If that was the voting culture, then you wouldn't have that problem. I think part of the problem is that people, these politicians make it seem that I've been in office for a long time, therefore I should stay in office because I have all this experience. Where on the other hand, it's quite the contrary. If we believe that there is its swamp and it's really deep, having been in office for a very long time should be viewed as a negative, at least not a positive.
Also, I would say a big problem is the bi-party system, right?
Yeah,
I
So
agree.
feel like
I
even
agree
if you-
100%.
Even if you drain the swamp, there is some head in the Democratic Party who is not beholden to any, or Republican Party who doesn't have to listen to any voters. Like we saw this with Hillary Clinton in 2016, right? Like they basically went, yeah, we don't really care what you're doing with Bernie. Our candidate is Hillary Clinton, no matter what, because they don't have to listen to any votes, any public opinion. So I think the best action the best course of action of that is just voting in third parties or
Term limits, maybe.
term limits. That's one thing. Also,
No more career politicians.
that, yeah. There was another one I forgot, but yeah.
Well, that was just a quick. I think voting is important, and it's a little unfortunate that we missed speaking on it, but yeah, I guess this will do for now. So we shift back into discussing how we get people on board with the idea of making change happen, not just for police brutality, but in general, I guess.
Like before we get into like positive like ideas, one thing that like I kind of mentioned earlier, like when talking about the French Revolution, for example, for some weird reason, is that like letting people fail makes people more open to the better and more effective ideas. Like Chaz, for example, like there are some that want that like anarcho like society, and I think it was just like a few hours ago where Chaz had their first murder. Like it's probably gonna fall apart very soon, and hopefully people are safe. But like it's stuff like that where okay, you bring people away from the idea of Chaz and like, hey, maybe these more tame ideas work better. Like sometimes trying out the bad ideas first and seeing how they don't work ends up bringing the good ideas to light.
Yeah.
Going back briefly to the two-party system, and I think that this is, I would preface this by saying this is not a realistic thing that could be implemented anytime soon. But I think one of the main ways you avoid having a two-party system is if you have a points-based voting system. That is to say, you went to the voting booth, you'd vote for your 5 favorite candidates, or maybe 3 out of 5 or something, whatever. Let's say 3. Your number 1 guy gets 8 points. Your number 2 person gets 4 points. Your number 3 person gets 2 points, something like that. And then all the points are tallied up, and the person who has the most points wins. The reason that would dismantle the two-party system almost instantly is that then you could run as someone who is everybody's second choice. In other words, you could suddenly be in the middle where Republican people who usually vote right would put you as their second choice. People who usually vote left would put you as their second choice or third choice or something like that. And you could come out on top without having to be at either of the two extremes. Or if you're someone really out of left field, let's say you're Andrew Yang and you have enough money to just run independently. Maybe, true, people aren't going to vote you as their first choice. Democrats are going to vote for Democrats. Republicans are going to vote for Republicans. But let's say you campaign in such a way that you can convince a lot of people that typically vote left that, UBI is a good idea. They should put you as their second choice. And you convince a lot of people that vote right that you're an entrepreneur, you're a businessman, they should vote for you as your second choice. You can sort of come out on top like that. And I think that sorry?
No, I'm just keep going.
That was pretty much it.
That's pretty good. I like that.
You just described ranked choice voting, and ranked choice voting is already like a proposal, not just in Maryland, but across the states. And it's already being implemented in like Australia and other countries. And yeah, you're right. Like it's increased the amount of parties having ranked choice voting. Like yeah, it's generally considered a bad idea by most Republicans because it would cause a decrease in Republicans, and Republicans don't want that because that's how politics are. But yeah, ranked choice voting gives a lot of power to the voter. Some legitimate rebuttals against ranked choice voting is that it decreases voter turnout, and it increases the amount of knowledge a voter needs to be able to vote according to their own values or convictions or policy ideals and stuff. But either way, ranked choice voting seems like a good idea in my opinion.
Like you want people to be more knowledgeable about what they're voting.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and briefly on your thing about the Republican Party, I know this is a bit of an aside to the police brutality discussion, but I'm of the opinion that if the Democrats sweep this term, the Republican Party is going to completely fall apart, and may not even exist in 10, 15 years if the Democrats sweep everything.
The failure of the Republican Party to actually like, hey, Trump, you're not that great of a guy, is probably going to shoot them in the foot in at least 10, 15 years, like you said.
Not only that, but sorry, go ahead.
Real conservatives know that Trump isn't conservative. Like real anythings know that Trump isn't one of them.
But what I was thinking more like if the Democrats win, if the Democrats sweep, what they would essentially need to do to guarantee themselves victory is make it bananas easy to vote. Like imagine that they made it so that everybody could mail in vote all the time. Like voter registration was just so easy. Because essentially, generally speaking, Republicans win by trying to win with the white vote only, right? So essentially they say white people are like 55, 60% of this country. If I can win 80% of the white vote, I'll win my election. However, if the black vote turnout is really high, there's almost no chance for Republicans to win. If the Hispanic vote turnout is high, if the vote of all minority groups is high, Republicans really don't have a chance. And there's the other fact that sooner rather than later, white people are not going to be a majority in this country. They're going to be a plurality for a very, very long time. But this idea that you can win on white people alone is really dying. And I think that if the personally, I think if the Republican Party is ever going to survive, it's going to be by completely abandoning social issues and focusing only on the economy. But they're way too proud and stubborn to ever do that. So
I agree and slightly disagree with what you're saying. You're right, and it goes hand in hand. Like, the reason why the Republican Party isn't really getting votes from minorities is they're not actually conveying or communicating what might be good about non-socialist or capitalist policies that would work for minorities, because it's there, but they're not going to be able to communicate it. And then secondly, like even though the left can get annoying to the point of pandering to people of color, they're at least showing that they care, they're making efforts, and that kind of wins a vote in a way. It's not like Republicans are kowtowing to white people and white people specifically. They're just either very old school in the case of like Mitch McConnell, or not doing well at actually communicating what would be good about certain Republican policies or the Republican or conservative policy ideas.
But it's not only that. I mean, in my opinion, at least I'm not talking about average Republican voter, because I think that the average Republican voter is not that racist. But the average Republican senator,
just a little bit, not that, just a little bit.
I think
It's a little bit. Everybody's a little racist.
Everyone's a little racist, as David said. I really think that the average Republican senator or congressman thinks to themselves, would this policy help African Americans? Okay, I'm a little bit less interested now. Like, I think they actively go out of their way. Obviously, their number one priority is getting reelected. And I'm not saying that they're going to, if they think that if they do whatever it takes to get reelected, sure. But I also think that they genuinely have zero interest in helping African Americans. So the idea that, let's argue conservative positions in order to see how they can help minorities, I don't think they're interested in that. They would much rather win through minority voter suppression than through actually helping minorities and convincing them to vote for them.
You be right. You're hitting a point.
100% right. That's how
Cocaine Mitch is Cocaine Mitch for a reason.
Do you think there is a distinction to be made between Republican and conservative?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people consider the two to be the same.
Conservatism is an ideology. Republican is a party. I mean, you can have one without being the other. You know what I mean? It's like I mean, let's break it down right to its crucial elements, right? Conservatism, fundamentally, textbook definition is you don't like change, right? You're resistant to change. Progressive is you do like change. So that's one aspect of it. But it tends to be, there's a lot of other terms that are thrown as if they were the same, and they're really not. There's like right-wing, conservative, Republican. Then there's this other thing called libertarian. And there's all these other things that they get put into play. I think that if you want to go back to the like conservative not wanting change on social issues, that tends to put you on the right, because typically I think that people see the way social issues have moved in this country as an improvement. At least progressives see it that way, in terms of legalizing gay marriage, in terms of desegregation, all that stuff. And if you're truly conservative and you don't want that change, then that makes you against those sort of social movements. But then there's this other aspect of being fiscally conservative that I think is often ignored. And I think that, as Tyler had said before, and a lot of us had said, that the two-party system forces you to be in one camp or the other and dissuades having nuanced positions. Like it's possible to be in the middle of the Venn diagram where you say, okay, on this issue I don't like this, or on that issue I don't like that. Like, look, I'll give you an example. And I don't want to really speak for anyone else here, but I know people who are of African descent or were born in Africa, and they feel a certain way about gay marriage because culturally for them, being gay is just not accepted the same way, right? So there is a sense in which they're conservative, but it's only on one issue. On every other social issue, they agree with Democrats. So it's possible to have these nuanced positions, and that's why I think it's more important to enumerate what your positions are and describe them rather than just saying I'm conservative or I'm Republican or I'm something like that.
I mean, yeah, I agree. It's not just Africans, it's most foreigners in general, and also Americans too. Like, this is probably not the best example, but if you ever go to a World Star Hip Hop comment section, they are definitely not pro LGBT. They are very, very anti LGBT, and it's kind of sickening to see. Like, I'm pretty sure it's mostly just trolls joking, but yeah, like even though it's legalized, I would still say that it's going to take about another generation for it to be as accepted as we want it to be, as ideally as it should be, which is like not even on people's minds. It's just like it's like picking between like colors, like red, blue, green. Oh well, different sexual orientations. I'm colorblind, but
except I actually am.
Like it's weird to think that like it takes like the amount of mental capacity that it does, like whether or not somebody's gay, straight, whatever, like it takes a lot of, like, we think about it a lot, like as a society and what it means. Like ideally it means nothing. Like it's just another thing. Like, oh, what's your favorite color? Oh, are you gay or straight? Like those are just absolutely irrelevant things. Like of course it'll still be a meme. Like pineapple on pizza is a choice, is a meme. But like that's the thing. Like, well, it's a bad example because
I'm gonna get
sexual orientation is obviously not like a choice. Like your favorite color.
Before
would
you
be.
Get hate, let's remember that we're supposed to be speaking on how we
Police
get people
brutality.
to get on board with change. So maybe we should go to that and not whatever would give you hate right now.
No, I want to hear it. I want to hear it now.
Listen, I'm trying to save you. I'm trying to save you.
I know what you're trying.
Don't worry, I know what I'm saying.
No, he's trying to save me, bro.
My intentions are cool. What I'm
No,
basically
you're fine.
I'm
trying to save him from. I don't know what he's gonna say. I'm just trying to save him from whatever it is.
He's gonna say it.
The point I'm trying to make is that like 100 years ago, like in 1920, not even 100 years ago, like in the 1960s, like the difference of how African Americans were treated in the 1960s and the 1970s is obviously drastically better. Or it's obviously drastically better now than it was in the 1960s. Like within 2 generations, I would say that, and I would hope that, for example, hate crimes go down against people who are LGBTQ plus people. Like I would hope that just in general, society is more accepting and more progressive.
And that's the thing. Black people.
And
that's true.
And I'm basically trying to say, like, with the changes that are needed when it comes to police reform, time is one of the necessary components. Of course you need good policies, but you also need time for the changes to be accepted, implemented, perfected, rationalized. Insert adjective here, you know what I mean?
That's what I wasn't going to agree with, and I know you were trying to save me, Yvonne, but it's not as bad as what you thought it was going to be. What I was going to say is that even though we say, like, going off your World Star point, like, even though people say, yes, we've accepted gay marriage, I genuinely think that if you asked most Americans today, would you be okay with your kid being gay? Not with someone else, with your kid being gay. Most of them would say no, right? So there's different levels of acceptance. It's one thing to say, okay, oh yeah, those gays over there, they can get married. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. And it's a different thing with you being perfectly fine if your own child were gay. That's a different level. And I think that it takes time and it takes generations to go from one level to the other. So likewise, with the police brutality thing, the first change, which is the legal change, is comparatively easy and is the first change that you make, right? Like you first make all these changes that we were talking about, and you get people to accept those. And once those are put in place, later the cultural change hopefully follows after that.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, Tramel, I know you were trying to chime in. What were you trying to say?
No, I was saying for that gay thing.
That gay thing? Listen,
it's
how
like
about
you
we
get-
stick to what we're supposed to be talking about? We seem to be
like-
straying a
it's
bit
like
too
your
far
parents-
from the light
your
of
parents
God.
don't want you to be gay, right? Yeah, that's because they probably just want grandkids.
All right.
It's more than okay. Well, it's not.
And that's
Let's
part
not.
of it.
Yeah, that's a no from me, dog.
That's a no. We can talk about maybe on a separate separate, different but equal podcast.
Did you just imply? No, I'm just kidding.
Getting people on our side. Any other? Because my argument for this is one. I've made this before to Hakeem and Tramel, but it's one that doesn't really rely on making the racial argument. And I say that because, in my view, like I've said before, right? If you want to make change happen in America, at least quickly, you need capital and you need the numbers. Two things which we lack. So the way I see it is, our best bet is to convince the fence sitters. And the fence sitters are generally, for the most part, suburban white people who will most likely tend to be liberal, who aren't exposed to the issues that we're talking about. Right? So it's like they're fully willing to support so long as it's explained to them, right? And a lot of what we see being spoken about is how white people need to educate themselves and whatnot. But if we have the opportunity and we have a platform where we can educate them on the issues that they might honestly want to know about, but don't really have a space where they can ask their questions without feeling like they're being attacked for the fact that they're white and they don't know. Right. I think the best thing we could do is accept them with open arms, right? Understand that it's not necessarily their fault that they're not living the conditions that we're living, right? Just like we didn't choose to be born black, we didn't choose to be born in a society that isn't necessarily fair to us. They didn't choose to be born where they were born. They didn't choose to be white. If they don't know, the best thing we can do is tell them about what they don't know, right? And when you jump to making the racial argument, we have to be honest, given America's history, making any argument about race, especially when you're a minority speaking to someone white, it's going to get uncomfortable, right? Because for them, literally every word is kind of going to be like walking through a minefield where they're not sure what they can say, they're not sure what they can ask, they're not sure how they're supposed to react to what you say. So the way I see it is, it's good that we make the racial arguments, but I believe that the data that we have present at the time being is enough to make a case that doesn't need to use race. And for example, here's what I mean. Let's take, for example, the idea of police reform, right? A lot of people are saying police reform, that's crazy. Why would we need to, reform the cops? Everything's working fine. I haven't noticed any problem. Why do you need to make this change happen, right? Easy thing with that is simply bring up the history of the police in this country. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to even post Civil War, after the unification of the police, there were plenty of issues within the police department. And one of the biggest issues they faced was the fact that the local government was completely intertwined with the police department, to the point where if you were the local elected official in a particular precinct or whatever, you essentially had control over every single position within the police department. So the cops that you hired were essentially your goons. So they'd go around passing out flyers to get you reelected, trying to do good deeds in your name and saying, hey, you know why I'm doing this? It's because this person put me there. So if you want these services to continue, you better vote for this guy or whatnot. And what happened eventually was that a lot of police chiefs were like, yo, we're being hired essentially to make sure that whoever is in office right now can keep power. And because of that, the people hiring us aren't they're not really caring about the quality of the people that they're putting into the force. So the police chiefs took it upon themselves to start a sort of reform within the police department. One of the first things they did, right? And again, remember, this is the police chiefs themselves. It wasn't the people. It wasn't the elected officials. The reform came from within the police departments, where they decided the first thing we're going to do is establish new standards for anybody that's going to join the force. And then from there, they went on to saying how they could go about making sure that officials in the area didn't have so much power over the precinct, because these were cops that actually wanted to, do their job properly, right? And then after that came reform in terms of what they're actually supposed to do within the community. Right? Originally, cops were in charge of things like street cleaning, garbage pickup, caring for homeless, caring for the sick, caring for the poor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they realized, okay, we can't do all of this and at the same time say we're going to be walking the streets 24/7 to take care of crime. We need to let the people who are supposed to handle the trash. We need to let the organizations that are supposed to take care of the poor and the sick or whatever. At the time, I would guess that would be maybe like churches and whatnot, whatever it may have been. They said, we'll let those people focus on that and we'll refocus on crime, right? And then you go on and on and on and on. And what you see is this constant reform. Now, does this mean that, black people were treated well? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that the police department itself has had reform, right? And when you look at, for example, when we unearthed the fact that the mafia ran deep within the police department around the 1950s, and that came to light for literally everyone to see, the middle class at that point rose up and said, yo, we do not want a police department this corrupt within our country. We want to see some change happen. If it doesn't, all of you losing your jobs, basically. And then after that, we saw more police reform, right? And that kept going on and on and on and on. Recently, I'm not sure what that history has looked like, but the point in all that is to say, police reform is nothing new. Our cops themselves, throughout history, have realized that if their job is to serve the people, then they need to hold themselves to a certain standard, right, that allows them to serve the people as best as possible. Reform is nothing crazy. If you realize that there's a problem going on, right, there is nothing crazy about saying, let's fix the problem. And sure, when you look at even things outside of the police department itself, but in terms of their interaction with the populace, right? Even when you look at the distribution of people who get arrested, people who get wrongfully convicted, yes, there's a clear bias visible in that black people get longer sentences, right? Black people get arrested for a lot more things that, you're not going to see a white person get arrested for. But that doesn't mean that even for the white people, it doesn't happen. It still does. So at the very least, if you don't want to acknowledge that there is possible racism or at least a racial bias going on, what you can acknowledge is that the system, which is allegedly supposed to be fair and equal, is not. It is clearly broken, right? And for all the people who claim to have this love of country and love of the Constitution and love of America as the greatest nation in the world that gives you the best opportunity for change, reform, and whatever through legal ways, right? I think one of the arguments we can bring up to them is the Declaration of Independence itself. And, before I read you the excerpt I want to say for myself, I believe that's one of the things, despite all its issues, that makes America one of the greatest countries you could live in if you want to create some form of change. Because although it is slow, it is built into our own legal system that you as a person, if you can get enough traction going, you're able to create change within the country, right? And then in terms of the passage from the Declaration of Independence, I'll skip the first part, which we all know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, whatever, right? But the second part to that is that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So it's within our own legal system. It is our right as citizens of this country that if something is going wrong, we can and should change it. That is the whole thing behind the Declaration of Independence, behind the Constitution of this country, that we have the power, we have the right, and in a sense, a moral obligation to change any injustice that we see. So even if you don't want to agree that it's some sort of racial thing, at the very least, there's enough evidence to show that regardless of your race, cops are still abusing their power. Period. Therefore, especially given that they themselves have realized through history that their departments needed reform, I believe for the people who are scared of jumping into the racial side of the discussion, we can make a case to them that you don't even need to go as far as race. In terms of the socioeconomic stuff, you can, but in terms of police brutality or whatever, I think there's a very strong case we can make to them that there is injustice going on, not just for Black people, but for everyone in general because of the way the police abuse their power. And as citizens of this country who claim to be, patriots or whatever, we have some duty to effect change such that the system we claim is fair and just actually becomes fair and just in practice and not just in theory.
Yeah. That is pretty fair.
Well said.
Cough, cough. You should have mentioned the Second Amendment. Sometimes we gotta rise up, son.
I mean, I'm hoping we don't rise up, all right. But if we gotta, I don't have one, so I'm gonna just stay locked in and wait till it's all over.
But you can get one.
So the Second Amendment is useful if, like, in a hypothetical situation, if the corona was like the Last of Us cordyceps disease, and all of a sudden people were running around zombie-like, you'd be thankful that we had guns.
I never actually thought about that. Like, Europe's completely screwed.
In a zombie apocalypse, they're screwed, man. They've got no way.
They can use knives.
Bro, imagine killing
On a
mob
zombie,
with
bro?
zombies with knives, mate.
Listen, if you know where to stab and you stab well enough such that you don't just dull your blades, you can get a good 10 zombie kills off one knife.
All right, but do I want to do that when I could just shoot him? This is way off topic.
Zombie apocalypse.
You almost got me, bro.
Hey, I'm not the one who started it. But also,
with,
just to finish real quickly, I was going to say, in terms of the community aspect, right? Because a lot of the argument that's being made with the abolish the police, whatever, is that we want to see the some sort of communal policing. And that's interesting because I was actually looking at this program in Chicago. I don't remember the name. I just know it's ran by some lady. Her last name is Kaba. But essentially, she created this this space where people can just come and share the way they feel. And initially, it was just a few women here and there. And then what she saw was that the young men in the population actually started showing up, right? And I think that's something we ignore a lot of the times, is that a lot of these young men have issues that they don't really have an outlet to express themselves through. And she essentially created that space for them. And obviously it didn't solve all the problems, but what they noticed was if the cops drove by, they were less likely to stop someone for no reason. The opposite gangs that would usually drive by those streets, they'd stop that. You'd see kids starting to play on the street again. Essentially, the community was brought back to life by the fact that she gave them a space where they could come together, right? So, I think that's, if you want to talk about a Black community, that's definitely something we could look into. Just getting back to a point where the streets aren't necessarily run by a fear of a cop stopping you or, getting shot by an opposing gang member, whatever, but they're run by this idea that if you step outside, you have a community waiting for you of people who are willing to listen to your issues. And people make throwbacks to the 1950s. America was so great because we had that sense of community and whatever. Listen, community is important. So I'm definitely not going to say that if we were to re-implement things like that within our own communities, it would be something bad. Like, if we want to talk about less policing, if in her case, and again, this is just one case, so I can't say that's definitely what's going to happen for every other one, but if she's managed to show that it means you're going to have less cops driving around for no reason, people are going to be, less likely to try to commit a crime, because you're not going to want to commit a crime when you see a bunch of kids just having fun, running around, whatever. Like, if you see a bunch of love around you, you're usually not going to want to be that one guy who steps in and ruins it all. So that's
hey, man, have you met a lot of cops?
Well, you get the point. You get the point.
Yeah, no,
I saw this one Vice documentary. I saw this one Vice documentary where I think it was in Chirac, where
You keep using that word.
Yeah, because Chirac. But I think it was in Chirac where like they stopped doing like drive-bys with guns and started doing them with paintball guns.
What?
And then they're having fun.
Okay.
What was the point of this story?
All right.
No. The police were like, "Nah, this is not okay. They cannot just be shooting up abandoned houses with guns, bro. Popo out here just ruining fun, bro."
True. Yeah. All right. I appreciate your contribution.
I appreciate you listening to me.
No problem, man. Open hearts,
Tyler,
open
were you
minds.
trying to say something earlier? Or was that...
I think he was trying to call Tramil's story dumb.
I wasn't really going to say anything. This was back to like when Ivan was talking about getting people on board. I was just going to say, what are you going to say to the person who wants to be able to call the cops on a black man and tells them to put their dog away?
I'm going to say, these nuts, go fuck yourself.
They can call the cops, but
because I feel like Yvonne's trying to convince the fence sitters, and when you at the point that when you call the cops on people just for spite, it's like, you just go fuck yourself.
I mean, we previously discussed that there might be some type of fine in place for prosecutable, like make it a prosecutable offense where you can find such behaviors and make it obvious so kids that call for math homework help don't get punished, but people who actively put other people's lives in danger are. I think that's like a really good like cutoff point, or at least starting point for such fines to be implemented to help prevent such behaviors.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say, I think there are a lot of people who the current system is working fine for them, and they will ignore the evidence right in front of them. Even if it's not, specifically racial bias, they will ignore that evidence because they don't really...
Like, jumping off of that, I think one of the, I don't know if I would call it a con of our culture or society, but I think that when you have a society that focuses on the individual more than the community like ours, one of the things is that people evaluate their sort of standing on the individual level. I think that generally in this country, people evaluate it on the family unit level, but they definitely don't evaluate it on the community level. And I'm not saying that it needs to be an either or, but it needs to be a mix of both. And people should be able to look at their communities Like one of the things I feel like I'm really fortunate because I grew up in Silver Spring, which is probably it's got to be one of the most diverse places in the United
You
States.
try to
and
dox yourself?
certainly the world. Of course.
Diverse. Silver Spring is like 90% Ethiopian.
That's
Nah,
not
bro.
true.
Silver Spring is
Not
diverse.
true. No, 90% of
No,
Ethiopians
we know
live
what he
there.
means, though.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. What I mean is that like if you look at downtown Silver Spring, there was this plot of land
You dox
that
yourself
used to
even
be-
harder.
used to be just like this open like astroturf, right? And then after was the astroturf, they built like an ice rink. And then after
Oh
that, they built, like, a
yeah,
civic
I used to
center.
play there all the time.
And
yo.
then once it became the civic center, what you had is that the civic center would be doing events like they'd like an African culture event that they'd have, and they'd have people selling all sorts of like arts and crafts, stuff like that. There would be like African music playing. So what I'm trying to say is that, and what has happened in Silver Spring is that values of real estate have absolutely skyrocketed. And so I think that it goes to show that in the general free market, people do want that sense of community. It's not that people don't want it, it's just that people don't know how to go about it and they don't want to really take that first step. But in places where there is a strong sense of community, people really want to go live there, and the values of real estate reflect that.
Well, with that being said, we're hitting the 4-hour mark in 48 seconds. So I think it's about time we wrap this up.
Wrap
with
this up.
Any final words from anybody?
Fuck
I've
the
talked long
police
enough.
coming straight from the underground.
Jesus was black.
So was Beethoven.
You mean Beethoven?
Yeah, Beethoven,
You mean
great
Beethoven?
ancestor of Jay-Z.
But honestly, this is the first podcast experience I've ever participated in. Shout out to you guys for listening to my rambles and terrible ideas. Hopefully I can do this again.
Yeah, man.
That was fun.
You guys are all welcome back for whatever we'll be talking about next. We still haven't done that energy thing. That's still up.
Energy.
Yeah, energy.
Got a lot of energy.
Nuclear versus wind versus solar versus
Renewable,
bro,
basically.
I would love that. I would love that.
And then
That's
it
cheating.
seems like
that's your major.
even
It's
just
literally my major.
even just with this topic, there's still a lot more that could be said. So we could have like a series where every so often we just continue off this one conversation. There's a lot that can be done, but
Especially as like time goes on, like the story updates, things happen.
All right. So, no last words. Actually, wait, hold on. We were talking about possible topics. Yeah. You guys can come back, right? We'd love to have you back. You can become part of the regular
Definitely
crew.
let us know. Let me know.
If you guys have topics that you believe are worthy of a podcast, this wasn't supposed to be this long. To be honest, when we started, I thought it would be like a 2.5 hour thing. But here we are. I mean, no, because I figured most people would be like, "Yo, I'm tapping out. I'm done with this." But here we are at 4 hours, and really, if we wanted to, we could keep going.
I mean, y'all are very hilarious, smart, intellectual, entertaining people. So
Oh my god. So many compliments.
What's wrong with you, bro?
I'm waiting.
I'm just saying, our conversation probably would have been shorter if like David spat more of his wisdom, because I feel like he would have concluded a lot of our ideas faster.
David got wisdom.
You know, David.
Coconut.
David's out here like mute spitter from those old super hot fire videos.
Boom, bap, bitty, bap, bap, boom, bam. But I'm not a rapper.
Sorry, I had to put like Father's Day gift
Oh, I
shop.
thought that was your outro.
Huh?
This man came back. Wait, we gotta let Coco speak. He said something.
He said something.
I had to go gift shopping. That's why I left.
Okay.
I mean, I was still there. I just couldn't really say anything because I was in like CVS and CVS.
All right. Well, I guess we'll end it here for today.
Yes, sir.
This has been a very special conversation on the Cinelix podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed, and we'll catch you with our next episode.
Where can you find this podcast?
You can find us on YouTube and everywhere else eventually. That's yet to be
Spotify,
determined.
Apple, Google.
Not Apple, not Spotify, not Google yet. Twitch, TBH, TBD. I was about to say TBH. Twitch to be determined, but YouTube for sure.
Yeah, we can totally get together. Like, I feel like our conversation would be more hilarious in person after COVID ends. Maybe
Is
like
this-
a once a month thing. Who knows?
Is this
Problem is we
the-
get rowdy in person.
COVID's not ending.
Is this the part where? Wait, we what? Focus. Oh, no. When we get together, we tend to. There's a particular person in the group that tends to get roasted.
Oh,
You're not talking about me.
No, I'm not talking about you. He knows who he is.
oh, he does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
I don't get roasted.
you think the laugh hides the pain, but it don't.
That hit
Well,
close to home.
the only thing hiding the pain is that forehead.
All right, okay.
Ooh.
It
Okay.
started.
What is going on?
Is this the part where I ask if anybody wants to shout out their socials? But I'll cut it out anyways. But you can if you want.
Nah, I'm good. I mean, like, I'll post my Snapchat in the chat if anyone uses it, but that's the only social media I have right now.
Yeah, I don't got socials.
I got it.
Shout out to Jonathan Haidt.
Shout out to Tom
Hypothesis of happiness and whatnot. I love that man's. And what's
Shout
it
out to all
called?
the
Coddling of
women
the
out there.
American Mind. I love that book. Shout out to the fathers tomorrow.
Yeah, happy Juneteenth and happy Father's Day.
Juneteenth passed, boy.
I know, but happy belated Juneteenth and happy Father's Day.
When's the solstice?
What?
What?
Why would you know that off the top of your head?
The solstice, bro.
I'm just confused why I would get.
Oh, it's today. What the hell?
Yes, today. Happy solstice.
Oh, solstice.
Wait,
I thought
I thought it was the 21st.
Wait, today was the longest day of the year, ain't it?
Yeah, right. It is. It's the summer.
I thought it was the 21st.
Goddamn.
Dude, that sucks. How days get shorter. I've been inside this whole time.
21st is the winter solstice.
Wait, very
But
different.
you gotta look at it the other way. The night gets longer.
All
Ahaha.
right. Yeah.
the night's the funnest part of the day, even though it's not the day.
All right. Thank you for listening. We'll
Peace, you guys.
we'll catch you guys on the next one.